Kaiden stood in the bitter northern wind, listening to its hollow scream as it rolled over the frozen peaks like a requiem for a world that no longer existed. The cold bit into his skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing on his chest as Roman's words replayed in his mind. He had resisted them at first, clinging to the memory of a gentler Arcadia, a land of laughter, shared warmth, and peace so natural that no one ever questioned it. Now those days felt like a fragile dream crushed beneath the iron-shod boots of invading monsters. To fight the beasts that had shattered their world, they too had to become something inhuman. That was the truth that bruised his soft nature more than any wound. He had always been a man of empathy and calm reason, but the world no longer had space for that kind of softness. Beyond the walls, Arcadia lay under its familiar blanket of snow, a pristine white shroud that covered both old mistakes and fading hopes. It was beautiful, but in a cold, uncaring way. The city gate, once torn apart in battle, now stood rebuilt, fresh timber, cold iron, and raw repairs marking it like a scar that had closed but would never fully heal. The very next day, within those walls, a senior staff meeting was called. The room was thick with the scent of damp clothes, ink, and tension. Kaiden stood at the head of a battered table, explaining the situation with a calm voice that barely concealed his exhaustion. Pointing to the map spread before them, he laid out the facts. After capturing Luna Fortress, Graxar had marched east toward Elven lands, leaving Krat and 10,000 orcs behind. If the elves fell as well, there would be nothing left to stop the orcish tide. And even if they wanted to counterattack now that Roman had reclaimed Luna, the storm outside was turning the world into a death trap. The blizzard was their greatest enemy. Moving an army through that kind of storm would be nearly impossible. Horses would sink into the drifts, men would freeze before they ever saw the enemy, and the orcs, who thrived in snowfields like predators born of ice, would tear them apart. Kaiden admitted bluntly that if they fought the orcs in those conditions, they would lose. Across from him, Roman sat with arms folded, as solid and unshakable as the mountains themselves. His eyes didn't show doubt or fear, only calculation. The war, he said, was now a war against time. Every moment they spent hesitating was another moment Graxar used to secure his dominance. Right now, Graxar still believed Luna had fallen. That ignorance was their last advantage, and if they didn't seize it, the chance would be gone forever. Kaiden argued that there was simply no way to move through that storm, gesturing to the window where white-out conditions swallowed everything beyond the glass. Roman met his gaze directly and told him to gather every soldier Luna could muster. There was something in his eyes, an authority that didn't ask for agreement, it demanded obedience. He would show them a way to survive, he said, a path Luna had never learned to walk. The scene shifted from the smoky, cramped chamber to the open training grounds inside the fortress. The wind whipped cloaks and banners as Luna's warriors stood in formation, faces tired and hardened by loss. Roman stood before them, his silhouette stark against the grey sky. He began by telling them something they did not want to hear. He acknowledged their efforts to adapt to Arcadia's brutal environment, but said that they lacked desperation. Silence fell, heavy and sharp. The words cut deep. These men had bled in the snow, watched their homes burn, and buried their dead. To hear that it still wasn't enough felt like an insult. Kaiden couldn't hold back and asked if Roman was claiming they hadn't truly tried. It was anger born of wounded pride and exhausted hearts. But Roman's face remained completely unreadable as he answered yes. Inwardly, Roman compared Luna to another place he knew, the North Sea Ice Palace from his past life. He thought of what separated the two. The answer to him was simple. In Luna, safety had been guaranteed by the power of the World Tree and Queen Isabella. Beneath that divine shelter, the people had forgotten how to stand on their own. Perhaps in the beginning, Luna had fought hard to survive the cold. But once Isabella was born and her blessings spread warmth and protection, they had grown complacent. They traded vigilance for comfort, discipline for dependence. When she disappeared, the entire kingdom crumbled almost overnight. He told them that plainly. Luna, he said, had placed its entire weight on a single pillar. When that pillar vanished, the structure collapsed. A country that lost its ability to defend itself the moment one person went missing could not be called normal. The soldiers shifted uneasily because beneath the sting of his criticism there was truth they couldn't deny. Then Roman made a declaration. Now that Luna had been placed under Dmitri's command, he would make them self-reliant. He would not simply protect them, he would break and rebuild them. He introduced a new name to them, Seilin's martial arts. It was more than a fighting technique, it was a way of existing in the snow. He explained that it wasn't just about moving across the frozen land, it was about erasing one's presence entirely, leaving no footprints, no breath, no sound. With it, they could become part of the winter itself, unseen, unfelt, yet deadly. More than that, he would teach them how to track enemies even in the heart of a blizzard, where eyes were useless and sight vanished into white. It was a discipline that surpassed Luna's old ways in every respect. The training that followed was merciless. Days blurred into one another, filled with harsh drills and relentless conditioning. Soldiers who had once been stiff and clumsy in deep snow learned to glide over it. They learned to steady their breathing, to quiet their hearts, to feel the slightest tremor beneath their boots and the faintest shift in the wind. One day, as they watched Roman move through waist-deep snow as easily as if he walked on stone, one of the lunar warriors whispered to Kaiden, asking if Roman was some kind of angel sent by the gods. Others murmured in agreement. To them, there was no other explanation for what they were seeing. Kaiden looked at Roman and shook his head. No, he answered. Roman was not an angel. He remembered their first meeting. The overwhelming presence, the calm savagery in combat, the unbreakable will. For a brief moment in the past, even Kaiden had wanted to believe Roman was a divine savior. But the longer he followed him, the clearer it became. Angels brought mercy and comfort. Roman Dmitri brought something else entirely. He was the very embodiment of a warrior's spirit, the will to endure, to dominate, to bend the world through sheer strength of resolve. In Kaiden's eyes, Roman had already stepped into the realm of transcendence, beyond normal human limits. He told the others that if they followed this man, they might one day reach toward that same distant height. Preparations finished quickly. There was no room left for doubt or delay. 2 days later, under a bruised purple sky, the heavy gates of Lunar Fortress opened once more. Roman and the newly trained lunar warriors stepped out into the blizzard. This time, they did not stumble or huddle against the cold. They moved as shadows sliding over a white canvas, silent, coordinated, and deadly. In just a handful of days, they had become something fundamentally different from what they were before. Far from the fortress, deep in the jagged mountains, another story unfolded in darkness. A cave mouth guarded by 2 hulking orcs gaped in the cliffside. Their breath steamed in foul clouds, tusks yellow and cracked, bodies looming like grotesque statues carved from flesh. Inside, prisoners from Luna huddled together in the freezing gloom. The air was suffocating, a mix of damp stone, unwashed bodies, and the sour stench of fear. An orc stomped into the chamber and announced, with cruel satisfaction, that Graxar had captured Lunar Fortress and Arcadia now lay practically in orc hands. His harsh laughter echoed along the walls, grinding what remained of the prisoners' hope into dust. Among them sat Gyro, a guardian knight of Luna, who had once rushed ahead against orders to attack the orcs on his own. His armor was gone, his status stripped away, replaced with rags and bruises. He felt as though the world had collapsed around him. Every breath hurt. He blamed himself for everything. The loss of his men, the fall of his homeland. In his mind, he had pushed Luna off a cliff with his own hands. That self-hatred was a weight heavier than chains. Without warning, the orc tossed something into the cell. A human hand landed on the floor with a sickening sound. Pale fingers, stiff and curled. The orc called them slaves and told them to eat if they wanted to live. Then he left, closing the door with a dull final thud, sealing them once more in the dark. Quiet curses and choked whispers spread among the prisoners. Their anger had no teeth. Hunger and cold had dulled even their defiance. Then Gyro stood. He walked toward the severed hand, not with hesitation but with a strange, deliberate calm. The others watched, expecting him to give in, to accept the orc's humiliating terms, just to stay alive. Instead, he picked up the hand, sat facing the door, and began pulling away the flesh. His eyes held a cold, frightening clarity. When his comrades asked what he was doing, he answered simply, even if he died here, he would take some of the enemy with him. There was no madness in his tone, only resolve. He stripped the flesh and began grinding the exposed bone against the floor, shaping it into a jagged point. The scraping sound echoed like a grim rhythm in the cave, morbid and steady. The others stared, caught between horror and awe, as their fallen knight reshaped his despair into a weapon. As he worked, Gyro's thoughts spiraled through every choice he had made. He wondered if, had he waited for the 30 reinforcements from Dmitri instead of charging ahead, things might have turned out differently. Could those unknown warriors have saved Luna before everything collapsed? He answered himself with bitter logic. Dmitri owed them nothing. They had no deep alliance, no shared history. Why would a distant lord sacrifice his own limited forces for a kingdom that had already been consumed by war? From the start, he concluded, there had never been any real hope. He felt abandoned not just by other nations, but by the heavens themselves. They had once fought to protect their continent, and now they were being thrown away like scraps. He remembered in some quiet internal space the question he had once asked the gods. What did they want from Luna? Why did those who had sacrificed everything end up suffering the most? No answer came, only cold and silence. He exhaled, a soft, resigned sigh that hung briefly in the frigid air. His fingers tightened around the sharpened bone. He accepted one final truth. His life as a snowfield swordsman was over. He would never again wield the polished steel that had once defined him. Now there was only this crude shard and the last flicker of his will. Gyro moved to the side of the doorway, pressing himself into the shadows. If this was to be his end, he decided it would not be as a helpless victim. He would die facing the enemy as a human, not as an animal waiting for slaughter. Heavy footsteps approached from outside, vibrating through the stone. The latch lifted. The door began to swing inward. Gyro sprang forward with everything he had left, bone shard aimed for the throat of the first silhouette that appeared. The tip stopped a breath away from Kaiden's neck. Both men froze, eyes wide with shock. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between that sharpened bone and Kaiden's skin. Gyro's chest heaved, his heart pounding like it was trying to escape his ribs. Kaiden stared back, just as stunned, because both of them had believed the other to be dead. Words stumbled at the threshold of their lips and then fell away, leaving only stunned silence. Then motion returned to the world. Kaiden's rescue squad flooded the chamber with purposeful speed, unshackling prisoners and helping them to their feet. Orders were given in quick, sharp whispers. Bodies moved, chains clattered, and the long-dead hope in the prisoners' eyes flickered back to life. Kaiden, guiding them out through the snow and stone, moved with a grace and certainty he hadn't possessed before Luna's fall. His steps scarcely disturbed the ice. He had learned, in his own way, to walk the same path Roman was carving. Gyro stumbled along, still struggling to believe what was happening. In his mind, Luna should already have been wiped from the map. Everything he knew about how the world worked told him this moment was impossible. Yet here he was, alive, walking out of a prison he had accepted as his tomb. Kaiden turned to him with an energy that warmed even the frozen air. He told Gyro to pull himself together. The war, he said, was not over yet. There was a spark in his gaze that hadn't existed before meeting Roman, a flame borrowed from a greater fire. Gyro managed to ask what Kaiden meant, his voice raw. Kaiden answered with a faint, almost boyish smile. Dmitri's forces had crushed the orcs, and Luna Fortress had been reclaimed. Gyro's world tilted. The idea that 30 foreign warriors had accomplished what he believed impossible felt like a miracle. His eyes filled and overflowed, hot tears carving clean lines through the dirt on his face before freezing in the cold. The crushing guilt that had been suffocating him loosened its grip. Luna hadn't died because of him. The homeland he loved had survived. He looked around, searching for the man whose name now carried that miracle, Roman Dmitri. He wanted to thank him, to bow, to apologize for ever doubting that salvation could come. He wanted to see the face of the commander who had turned the tide with so little and changed the fate of his kingdom. Far above, on a small cliff overlooking the valley and the freed prisoners, stood a solitary figure. Roman watched everything silently, sword at his side, cloak fluttering in the cruel wind. Snow swirled around him, but he remained mute and still, eyes scanning the distance for threats that might yet appear. He did not descend to stand among the cheering captives. He did not wait to receive their gratitude or bask in their praise. This, to him, was not the end. Only one step on a path soaked in snow and blood. From his vantage point, Roman observed the kingdom he had claimed and the people he had begun to reshape. A lone sentinel facing whatever storm would come next.